Hi, welcome to the Frugal Frau. I'm Sukey, your host, and today we're going to make winding sticks. And this is an example of some short winding sticks, and this is an older example of longer winding sticks. And the purpose of these sticks is to help you to flatten or see where you need to flatten a board in case it's a really nasty looking board. Now, we have a lot of drawer fronts to make, and I don't need longer ones, so I decided that I'd make these two shorter ones today for my use because I'm the one who's going to do most of the wood prep for Tom for this next project for a client. So we have a lot of wood like this, which is pretty rough cut, and oftentimes a piece like this will be high on one side or high on the other across this plane, or maybe it's high in the middle, or maybe it's high on both sides and lower in the middle. This set of tools, which is very simple to make, helps you to see exactly where that is. Now I know I'm not holding this steady and the camera angle can't see that, but we will demonstrate the use of this at the end of the video. So before we get started, please like, subscribe, and comment, and ask questions. It really helps the channel out and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. The first step is to select some 1/2 inch thick wood, preferably clear without knots. Flatten and smooth it if necessary, as you would do for most projects. Here I am cutting away the knots, as I will cut the rest into 2 pieces of identical length to use for my winding sticks. I need to square very accurately one lengthwise edge on each of the 2 identically sized boards. I am just pointing to the upward grain direction since I will plane both pieces in the upward grain direction to prevent tear-outs. Then I mark that so that I know S for a square and then a little arrow pointing upwards as you see here. This is very hard poplar, so I chose to use my high angle blade in my jack plane, but I have set the blade to cut very finely as I don't need to take too much material off. Notice my jack plane is much smaller than the one Tom uses. This is typical for all my planes, as I simply do not have enough upper body strength to push the larger planes. I use the fingers on my leading and gloved hand to ride along the face of the board, and this acts as a kind of fence, and it also helps me to keep the plane flat on the board edge. And now I am just checking to see how square this is, and I might need to take off a little bit more. And I don't want to plane off too much. I just need to get this very square. Repeat this process on the other board. I am using a marking gauge set to just shy of the board width and scribing a line by running the base of the gauge along the edge I have already planed. I will do the same on the other board. Next, I will plane down to this line on each board, and that way I know my 2 boards are identical in width. This is an important step, and don't forget to do this. Here I am carefully planing down to that line, and I know that line really isn't visible on the video, but trust me, it's there. And I'm not necessarily going along the whole length because the line wasn't exactly the same distance from the edge I'm planing along the whole length of the board, so I just keep checking it. The glove keeps me from actually scraping my fingers and rubbing it raw, especially when I'm doing a lot of planing. Again, check to make sure that your edge is square with the face of the board. And I'm just doing this with a small bench square. Next, I set my marking gauge to 1/4 inch, and I will scribe a line on one of the boards along the edge not marked with the S. The S-marked edge will always be the edge that sits on the board when using the winding stick. So here I just scribe that line in small, short strokes, and that usually makes scribing a little bit easier. I don't need to do this to the other board. Next, I am making a small mark with a knife at 2 inches and 2 3/4 inches in from each short edge of the board on the same face side that I just scribed along the lengthwise edge. I also scribed a short line 1/2 inch from the edge and then 1 inch from the edge. And rather than trying to verbally explain that, I have made a marked up picture so you can see that right here. These marks just serve as coloring guides because I'm going to color in some black areas, and this is on the back winding stick when you use it. And then I make a little point down to the point that was in the previous drawing and just make a little diagonal down to that. It's kind of like a little upside down arrow. And as you saw in the marked up photograph, I scribed each of these lines, and that just makes coloring in a little easier because I'm just going to use a very fine marker and then a thicker marker. And here you can see how I've just colored all of that in. Just finishing up. And here's a nice view of that. And you line these two sticks up on a board, put the colored one in the rear. Also place the long edges of each of these winding stick boards that were marked with an S or mark of your choice on the board that is to be tested. And on this example board, the left back edge obviously is much higher and will need to be planed down. Here I'm just circling the area that I needed to plane off on that board, and I'm just going to quickly try to plane some of that off right now, but probably not go through the entire process. After we stopped videoing, I actually got out my scrub plane to take a lot more material off, as I wasn't able to get very aggressive with this particular plane on this particular piece of wood.